so I've decided to make some comparisons between House of Leaves and Bandersnatch. The reason I make this particular comparison is, in addition to like the common overlapping kind of like psychological themes to it, I think there's a lot in common, but particularly when I read House of Leaves last summer, I was like, well, I wish there could be a movie of this, but I know it would be probably not very feasible. But I thought, it could probably be done with DVD menus, and I was reminded of that idea when Bandersnatch came out. So, without further ado, here are the parallels. First, most obviously, the main character is a psychologically unstable young man, and the viewer/reader is put into the shoes. They are distanced from it, both due to the author's choices and the narrator's unreliability and autonomy. In House of Leaves, this character is Johnny, and in Black Mirror's Bandersnatch, this is Stefan. Relatedly, they both undertake a big project that leads to mostly shunning society. In House of Leaves, this is putting together Zampano's work, and in Bandersnatch, that's putting together the game Bandersnatch. Both of them have a male and similarly aged friend, / other important character. It's hard to say like the second most important in House of Leaves because there's like Zampano and there's just like a lot more going on. I can't as obviously say it as I can for Colin. So it's Colin in Bandersnatch and Lude in House of Leaves. There's also creatures in both of them. In House of Leaves, this is the Minotaur, and the creature in Johnny's visions. In Bandersnatch, this is Pax. There's also horror and tragedy for obvious reasons. There's also more of a reliance on intrigue and morbid curiosity than relatability for the main characters. They both have dead mothers. There's also a question of who is authoring, or what is the foundational level. The options in House of Leaves include Danielewski, the author, Zampano, Johnny, and the reader. In Bandersnatch, this is Netflix. It's hard to say what we want to call like the upper level beyond Stefan's in the presentness, but without going outside the show. We might want to call it like the multi-timeline Stefan, or maybe like God, I don't know, and also the viewer. So it's just a bit difficult to tell like what is the most ultimate level. We also have the fact that it doesn't really matter what's real or what's skipped. Obviously it has an effect, but it's not, you don't have to know. In House of Leaves, this is the Davidson record, the footnotes, the appendices, etc. You can skip them. A lot of the footnotes are fake sources, and the Davidson record itself isn't real. In Bandersnatch, this is the various paths that Stefan goes on. My friend had this idea for a comparison as in both of them, the underlying source medium is a book. In House of Leaves, it becomes a film and then a book again. In Bandersnatch, it becomes a game and then a show. Sorry, trying to find where I put the number 11. Okay. So, in both of them, there's also, and this is one I'm critical of, they both have this kind of like psychosis implies murder thing going on. That's really overdone and harmful. Danielewski should have known better for his writing level, and Netflix should have known better for the day and age this is. While it did contribute to the loss of control theme and the deranged genius line, what with Davies and all, it wasn't part of the historical inspiration for Bandersnatch. It's already a harmful trope. It could have easily been replaced with some other thing that was highly out of character and highly consequential. The same could have been done with Davies to retain that parallel. I missed one. Okay, so they both involve drugs, chiefly the LSD trip in Bandersnatch, and chiefly ecstasy and the sheer quantity of drugs in House of Leaves. I have some criticisms for both of them as well. Colin was pretty irresponsible towards the well-being of Stefan, whether in his choice to dose him if he said no, or the whole jumping off the ledge deal. I don't think that was great publicity for the drug, especially now that we know that there are better ways of approaching these than just bad propaganda. In House of Leaves, it was just like an unrealistic picture of how often MDMA can be done. They were doing it like multiple days in a row for a long stretch of time, and that's just not feasible. Like, you're gonna run out of serotonin, and so that was a little bit unrealistic and just like unsafe to, if someone were to attempt that. I don't know if that was just like poorly researched or what, but okay, so now to the more exciting things here. We have some hidden stuff in both of them. In House of Leaves, this is the symbols on page 582, the codified in foreign passages and the literary references that are scattered throughout. In Bandersnatch, this is the QR code thing in the hidden ending. It's just like the noises that leads to a QR code, and then you can go actually play one of the games. I think it's Nosedive. In both of them, there are a lot of layers and self-reference. In House of Leaves, Johnny's timeline contains Zampano's timeline, possibly the other way around, or maybe they're equivalent, but I'm just going to take it at face value for this purpose. Zampano's timeline contains, ostensibly, the Davidson record timeline, which contains Danny Lewski's book, which the reader is reading. This is when Davidson is reading it in the depths of the hall, which, since he's reading it, that makes the Davidson record timeline contain the reader's timeline. Even if we chalk up the Davidson record to hallucination, we still have Johnny's timeline containing the reader's. In Bandersnatch, in Stefan's various timelines, we variously get to see reference to the level of it being a game, it being a Black Mirror episode, and it being a Netflix show. The latter becomes apparent to Stefan, though without understanding it. From another way of looking at it, we see that it's a choose-your-own-adventure show, which involves making a choose-your-own-adventure game based on a choose-your-own-adventure book. From these two perspectives, we see fourth wall breaking in many respects. Colin's comments and his theory told during the trip hint to Stefan about a level of choice beyond him in the present, and at the peak of self-reference, we see the Netflix symbol as an option to show Stefan. There's also a third way of looking at the layers, and this has to do with the theme of the loss of control. Stefan feels a lack of control over his decisions that the viewer ultimately makes, although he is able to resist a little bit. The viewer feels the lack of control over the choices that Netflix ultimately makes. This might also be framed as the illusion of choice rather than just a limiting of it. There's also actually a third, bit more hidden layer to this, and this is the gamification of Netflix. In one of my classes, I was introduced to the idea that Netflix is rolling this out as a sort of test run of a show game integration to compete with the gaming industry and the attention economy. So at the level of consumer base, it looks like we are choosing that format and that we have choice in it, but it's really Netflix's business tactics, which are themselves constrained by the video game industry's success. So that's a fourth level, and video games are involved at all four levels. I almost don't know why Netflix made it so easy. Well, the first thing they're rolling out of this kind, it seems like we could, like, you know, once we're told that they view games like Fortnite as a competitor, it's really easy to see that we're just kind of being played. But, you know, I actually don't think it's going to be that consequential. I won't get into the reasons why, and maybe they also just don't care. Finally, and this might be like the most of a stretch, I think they both, in a way, can be viewed as choose your own adventure. Bandersnatch is obviously intentionally and overtly set up as a choose your own adventure thing. Importantly, there's continuity if you have to go back and choose differently, and some choices get altered depending on your previous paths. An easy example of the former is if you originally agree to work with a team the second time around, Stefan and Colin will intuit having previously met. Examples of the second thing, which message or symbol options you get to show Stefan on the computer screen changes depending on the choices you made prior to that, and after that, depending. And if/who comes to visit Stefan to come check up on him, that might be Colin, that might be his girlfriend, etc. Now, of course, in House of Leaves, it's not choose your own adventure in the literal sense. There are no alternate endings, there are no choices to change your mind and retry, but there are choices that affect what is central and what background knowledge you have. And I honestly think House of Leaves is a bit more honest about this, because the same is technically true of Bandersnatch. You do come out with that knowledge, but in House of Leaves, it doesn't look like it's an option, so it's just a bit more honest about what you've done previously mattering. Let's see. Okay, so you also choose what you pay attention to. Some people choose to skip Johnny's stuff altogether. That's a huge and confusing mistake in my opinion, but you can just do that. You can just read Navidson Record and Zampano's footnotes if you really wanted to. Or even, you probably could skip Zampano's footnotes and just read the Navidson Record. That would be like an incredibly limited experience, in my opinion. But, I mean, if you just wanted to see what would happen if you did that first, I mean, you have full reign. It's a different story if you follow all the appendices and read all the mother's letters. It gives layers of context to the story and significantly changes the reading of it. This also goes for if someone is familiar or becomes familiar with certain literature, postmodern theorists, Hofstadter, and so on. And then they come back to the text, or they know that, and they come to the text in the first place. That changes it, although in a lesser way, since those, by preceding the work and by being independent of it, they won't reference the characters or fill in their backstories overtly. In a sense, the choices one has to make with following the Navidson Record, Zampano's footnotes, and Johnny's footnotes at any given time is similarly discontinuous and requires similar efforts of flipping pages back and forth and the mental juggling that a choose-your-own-adventure story does. And in a more directly related to Bandersnatch way, we can connect the labyrinth metaphor in House of Leaves to the paths deal in Bandersnatch. Like dead-end paths, footnotes can send you down rabbit holes without clear or any exit. That's it. Thank you.